Good evening to you. Hope everyone is doing well. Glad to see all of you here this evening. We're going to be studying from the book of Luke, and even more specifically from the book of Luke, chapter 23. So if you're lucky, and chapter 23 is all on one page in your Bible, you don't even have a page tonight. But if you're like me, chapter 23 starts on one and goes to the other, and it's twice as much work. So it'll be tough on you, but hopefully it won't overwhelm you too much. So we'll talk about the book of Luke here this evening, the third book of the New Testament, and the third of our four lessons, as it were, about, in a sense, the life of Jesus. We had the birth of Jesus, we had the teaching of Jesus, and then tonight we're going to talk about the death of Jesus, not the resurrection. We'll talk about that next week. So, sometimes people say don't leave Jesus on the cross, but that will be the case tonight because we need a subject for next week. Tonight we're going to read the chapter, so we're going to have some participation, but a lot of questions for you. Okay, and so there will be questions. Sometimes I tell you there's not going to be a test. Well, tonight there is a test, and all the questions are on the screen, and I didn't put any of the answers up there, which means you got to get them right. The only place that the answers are found are right here on this sheet of paper, and it's written so small I can't even read it. So we will hope for the best. But I will say this: I think our questions are going to be fairly easy for us this evening. A couple of things, though, here about the book of Luke. As you can see, the time period is sort of roughly the same area. It's the third book, the author credited to Luke here. The Luke Acts story is typically said to be the same author. In many cases, it's been argued that it's the same book that's just been sort of divided. Luke ends with Jesus' death and resurrection, and then Acts begins with the apostles going out. And so if you think about it, kind of like the way we talked about Samuel, Chronicles, those books that are called First and Second, it wasn't that somebody sat down and said, in the Old Testament, I'm going to write First Samuel, and then I'm going to write Second Samuel. They were scrolls, they were massive writings, and they divided them. And that's a little different in the New Testament. When we think about, like, in the New Testament, what are some New Testament examples of First and Second books? Corinthians is one. That's good. There's more. Thessalonians, Timothy, John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. One more. And Peter. But those are different because those are all letters, and they are letters to people. And if you were to go back and say, well, I wrote a letter, or I wrote an email, or maybe today we would say I sent a text message to a certain person on Sunday, I sent one, and then I sent one on Tuesday, and then I sent one on Friday. And they're all about different things. Well, that's what the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd books are in the New Testament. They are specific letters that address different things. But Luke and Acts is sort of a combined story that ends up being split. Yes.
I hate to say this in a way, but Luke is my favorite John.
Okay.
And it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's more comforting. It's more
Uh-huh. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, having a favorite gospel. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that the gospels are the story of Jesus's life, but it's told in a slightly different manner depending upon who the writer is. I think it's only fair that in some cases people like the book of Luke, in part because do we know what Luke's job was, what Luke's occupation was? Do we know what that is? He was a doctor, he was a physician. So it's possible that someone who is a physician would be able to tell a story different from, say, a Matthew of a tax collector. The way that they view the world is completely different. There are some people that view the world as a glass half full type situation. There are some people that view a glass half empty, right? Do you know anybody that is a glass half empty person? There are some people right now that say it's about to snow. And there are some people right now that say it's about to snow. They've said the exact same sentence, but they've looked at it completely different, right? Pat was talking about that earlier. Somebody complained, and Pat's like, it's January. This is what happens in January. I mean, we can fuss about it. We can be upset. We can't be too upset because it happens every year in January. But people look at things completely different. I think us looking at these Gospels, we look at it different. What appeals to you may not appeal to somebody else. I have one of my best friends. He and I talk often. He'll recommend movies or TV shows. He'll say, you should watch this. I think you will like it. And I hardly ever watch what he recommends, even though he knows what I would like. But then I will watch something and I'll say, I bet he would like this. And then he doesn't watch what we look at we are drawn to what we're drawn to. And the book of Luke is certainly a good one to be drawn to as well. So we're going to be looking at this again. How this is set up is we're going to have a little bit of scripture to read, and then 2, 3, or 4 questions that go with each set of scriptures. But it all comes from Luke, the 23rd chapter. So if you're on Luke chapter 23, that's where we're going to be here this evening. But the story is the Gospel of Luke. And we're going to start with Luke chapter 23, verses 1 through 5. Mom, you here to read this? Luke 23, verses 1 through 5.
And the whole multitude arose, and they went up, and they began to accuse him, saying, we found ourselves impersonating, and forbidden to be treated with Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King. And Pilate asked him, saying, art thou the King of the Jews? And he answered him and said, thou sayest it. Then said Pilate to the chief priests and to the people, I find no fault in this thing. And they were the more fierce, saying, he stirred up the people, seeking to have all Jews beginning from the Galilee.
So if we look back into the previous chapter, we see that Jesus was betrayed and arrested in the previous chapter. And we know those stories that that Judas had been the one who betrayed. Jesus was arrested. We also read in that previous chapter that Peter had denied Jesus. Jesus was mocked and beaten, and he ultimately faces the Sanhedrin. But this is where we are right here. So in this first starting point here of Luke chapter 23, Jesus is handed over to Pilate. Okay, and so Pilate is the government official here, as it were, the person who's going to handle, we would maybe use the word trial. That's probably not the best word to use for this, but we'll see in just a second. So let's look at a couple of questions here to start with. Again, this comes from, our questions will be answered from what we just read, and I've got the verse up there, so you're welcome to look back. So the first question, what accusation against Jesus did the multitude make to Pilate? What are they accusing Jesus of? And I got 3 things. Okay. Yes. Absolutely. That's the second of 3 things that they said, that he was basically forbidding people to pay their taxes. Well, if you're telling people not to pay their taxes, that will never go over well in front of a government official. That's a task that, what happens if you don't pay taxes? We see this sometimes, in the news. You can go to jail. If you don't, those names get listed in the paper, people go to jail. I was talking to Mary about this the other day. How does it work when they garnish wages? And she was kind of explaining sort of how that process worked. But sometimes people owe X amount of taxes, and you make $1,000 on your check, but they take $200 out of it. That never goes well. But Jesus, at no point, in fact, Jesus teaches the opposite. What? Well, when he looks at the coin, he said, give to Caesar that which was Caesar, and do what to God? Give to God what was God. And so Jesus right here in that teaching, he is a citizen of the world. You can be unhappy with the government. We can fuss all day about what taxes are spent on, but that's the same thing about talking about Luke and Acts. There's some things that you might say, oh, we don't need to pay for that. And I say, yes, we do. And I say, we don't need to pay. That's immaterial. That's not what Jesus was not advocating any overthrow of a government. So that's one thing. What's two other things that he was accused of? Stirring up the people. The Bible says, I think, perverting the nation. Stirring up the people. Will, what does it mean to stir people up? Tough, ain't it? Y'all probably already know who you already know who you've already got that person. The happiest day of your life was when either you retired or they quit, right? It might have been you. They might be saying the same thing about you. I hope not. Who knows? But they said that Jesus was stirring up the people. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, yeah.
I'd say kind of.
He was not trying to stir up the
Yes.
government, but that's getting stirred up.
Mm-hmm.
They want what he had to say.
Yes. Uh-huh. We've talked about this a few times. But Israel, or what we call today Israel, but this land where Jesus was preaching, was under the control of Rome. Now, ostensibly there was like a leader that was a Jewish leader, and he kind of had some token power, but really and Rome's only thing was for them, pay the taxes, keep everybody in line. We don't want to have to come down here and deal with this. It's like when you go to work and the kids are at home, you're like, don't do what you're supposed to do. Don't mess anything up. I'll be back at 5. You know, your goal there is to try, just keep the peace. I don't want that phone call saying, so they burned down the house. That's a problem. But Jesus was kind of stirring this up. That leads us to the third accusation. So he's stirring up the people, as it were. He's forbidding them from paying taxes, which was incorrect. What was the third accusation against him? Calling himself the king, or a king of the Jews. Now, that's a really strong accusation because it's interpreted a different way. Was it accurate to say that Jesus was viewed as the king of the Jews? Could you have accurately said that? Yeah. But as a Messiah, as a savior to it. But the Romans, the government, viewed this notion of king of the Jews as somebody who would like to take you, the leader, knock you off, and put him in charge. Of course. Nobody else could either. So these accusations are put up against Jesus. Have you ever heard the saying, you throw mud at it and see what sticks? That's a little bit of what we have right here, right? They're throwing things up against, and hopefully something will stick. Something that they can legitimately get Jesus in trouble for. You might know what Al Capone went to jail for. They didn't know all the bad things that Al Capone did. But his tax, United States history is full of getting on these little things. That's what they're looking with Jesus. One thing that we can say, he's doing this wrong, and we can get rid of him. So you're looking for something. Question 2. In verse 2, what did Pilate ask Jesus, and what did Jesus respond? Feels like a reasonable question. Okay, so they're saying you're the king of the Jews. Now, I've never been arrested. But I'm sure that if I had been accused of, let's say, robbing Durham's grocery, the first thing the police are probably going to say is, did you rob Durham's grocery? Because if I say yes, they're going to say, well, that's all we need to hear. We're done. I'm probably going to say no if I didn't do it. Or even if I did, I might be trying to hide it, and then they're going to have to try and figure something out. So Pilate starts with the first question. Are you the king of the Jews? Now, the answer that we're expecting from Jesus is one of two things. What are you expecting him to say? Yes or no, right? Yes or no. Jesus, of course, does not do that. What was Jesus' response to Pilate's question? It is as you say. Clear as mud, right? What does that statement mean? It is as you say. He said it, not I. Jesus didn't say it. You said it. But is Jesus saying yes there? Okay. She's saying no. There's not a good, this is an answer that really does not suit, but it also doesn't incriminate him in any way. In fact, what was Pilate's first conclusion in this read in verse 4 and verse 4 especially? Pilate says what? He said, I find no fault. So Pilate is saying, I mean, you said he did this and he did this and he did this, but I'm just not seeing it. And so Pilate, in a sense, saying what any government or law official is going to say, probably like to get him, but this ain't going to do it. This stuff here may not solve the problem. Oh, sure. Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Right. So in verse 5, but they were more fierce, saying, this is talking about the people here that have accused him. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. Basically what they're saying is what we would say, he's been teaching from Louisville all the way to here, just up and down nonstop. Well, is that accurate? He absolutely had been teaching. That's where the stirring up part that we'd mentioned a minute ago. But there's nothing wrong with it. There's no rule that said he couldn't walk from one Galilee to somewhere else and preach and teach. There wasn't anything wrong with that. But you see the angst that's in these people. Okay? Now, let's go a little bit further to the second set. This is Luke chapter 23, verses 6 through 12. Annette, do you care to read this one? All right. So if we go into this here just a little bit, the first thing here, if we go back to verse 5, they said he's come all the way from Galilee, all the way down, preaching and teaching. And Galilee triggers something in Pilate's head. In verse 6, when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked, what? Question number 1 up there. What did Pilate do when he found out Jesus was a Galilean? Pilate immediately thinks, wait a minute, it's out of my jurisdiction. That's somebody from Garrett County been brought to Lincoln County to, for court. Well, this needs to go over to them. So Pilate, who really has already said he doesn't really see that Jesus has done anything wrong, sees in a sense like an escape route for him. Oh, this is Herod's deal. Now, this is not the same Herod from when Jesus was a baby. That's turned over from that. But he realizes that he's in Herod's jurisdiction. He sends him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. So they rule different areas. They're in charge of different areas, but they're all right there. Later it says, Annette read just a moment ago, that Herod and Pilate had never met before. Okay? But it says in verse 12, they became friends with each other, for previously they had been at what with each other? Enmity. Does it say enmity in the King James or in something else? In enmity as well. So what does that word mean? They've been in disagreement with each other. They didn't know each other, but there was a divide, as it were, between them on what it was. So he takes him to Herod, or he sends him to Herod. And so question number 2 up here on the board, what's Herod's initial reaction to seeing Jesus? Well, okay, I think we can interpret this a couple different ways. First of all, verse 8 says, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired to see him because he'd heard a whole lot about it. That's verse 8. But why was he really wanting to see him? To see if he could do a miracle, right? He said, I've heard a lot about him. I want to see if he can do a miracle. Now, I don't know whether to interpret this as something as a positive or a negative. Let's go back to that glass half empty, half full, right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think you're probably right on that. And so he wanted to see some miracle done, as if Jesus was sort of this showman, as it were, right? And so he calls him in there, or in verse 8, he says he's exceedingly glad. And then verse 9, then he questioned him with many words, but Jesus answered how? He didn't answer anything. Why do you think Jesus didn't respond to Herod? Right. Yeah. You remember Simon the Sorcerer? Why did Simon the Sorcerer want the power that the apostles had? He wanted it to make money. He wanted that person because he saw that the apostles could do these miracles. They could heal people. They could feed people, whatever it might be. And he said, I would like to have that. I guarantee you there were other people besides Simon the Sorcerer that thought the same thing. And it would be really nice to be able to do that. There were probably people that thought it would be nice to be able to do that because I've got family members that are sick. That's not really what Simon the Sorcerer's thought was. He's like, I'd like to be able to make a little bit of money off this. That's perverting the gospel, right? Jesus, he's not answering these questions from somebody who's here, put him on stage. I'm not here to be the puppet in this situation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if somebody came to Lincoln County, it'd be not the deal.
Right.
Whether we agree with them or disagree with them, you probably still say, who is that guy? You find out more about him. I think that's a lot. Jesus is extremely positive.
Right.
Not with a lot of it.
Right.
A lot of people really well.
Well, it depends, and it also would depend on how you use the word popular. Popular could be very well known, not necessarily very well liked by everyone. But verse 10, one second. Verse 10 will distill it down to what kind of argument this really is. Because the first 9 verses, we got Pilate involved, we've got Herod involved, but verse 10 is going to show what this argument is really all about. What were you going to say, Mary? No, this is a descendant. His son, I believe, Herod Archelaus, I think. I may be wrong on that. Yeah. Verse 10, though, shows, it distills it all the way down. Let's look at verse 10. Verse 10 says, and the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Chief priests and scribes are not elected or appointed Roman officials. Chief priests and scribes are Jewish leaders. And verse 10 tells you everything you need to know about why Jesus was being accused, why Jesus was put on trial. Because verse 10 is the highest ranking people in the Jewish faith view Jesus as a threat. And Jesus' threat would eliminate them from a position of power that they had. And if you get rid of the threat, you maintain your spot. It appears to me that Pilate knew nothing about what was going on. Herod has heard a little bit about it and wants to know, but Herod, here in just a second, we'll look at question number 3. It doesn't go over real well with Herod, but it's the chief priests and the scribes who wanted to get rid of Jesus. That should not come as a surprise. Who were Jesus' harshest critics throughout the Gospels? The chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Jewish people that he came to teach were the harshest critics. It almost seems like the people that were outside of the Jewish faith didn't really care one way or the other. Some of those people were listening, they don't feel like that's really where the threat was. It came from the people sort of within. It was changing them. Question number 3. Before Herod sends Jesus back to Pilate, what did Herod do? Verse 11, where you'll see this. Herod, with his men of war, his soldiers, his guard, whatever word you want to use there, treated him with contempt, mocked him in verse 11, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Kind of, we would use the term made fun of, right? This, they'll write it on the cross here in a few minutes. This is the king of the Jews. Yeah, he's the king. Let's dress him up like one, right? That's kind of what we see right here. All right, questions? All right, let's go a little further. This is Luke. There's actually 2 readings here, 13 through 19, and then 20 to 25, but I split them because they're just a little bit longer. Linda, do you care to read 13 through 19? All right, let's go a little bit further there, 20 through 25. Mary, do you care to read that? All right. Now, Jesus is sent back from Herod to Pilate. And so in verse 13, Pilate, when he called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, he's brought in the Jewish leaders, he's brought in the Jewish people, all these people that are mad. He said, "You brought this man to me as one who misleads the people, and having examined him in your presence," Pilate tells him what? He said, I can't find what? He said, "I can't find any fault in this man concerning the things that you have accused him of." But Pilate is also a representative of this group of people. And remember, Pilate's main job is to keep the peace. And what you don't want is the religious leaders and the citizens of that religion running around mad. Well, Pilate wouldn't do anything. So you got to kind of calm them down a little bit. So Pilate comes up with a plan. The first question up there, what, according to verse 16, did Pilate now want to do with Jesus? In verse 16, what's Pilate's sort of response to this? I'll chastise him, get on him a little bit, and we'll let him go. That way nobody can say Pilate didn't do anything. But he's also thinking, go ahead. Sure. Yeah. So this notion of what he would do is, this will probably kind of calm Jesus down. get out, you stop preaching and teaching. I don't want to be treated like this again. But we're also not putting him to death because, again, there's nothing to accuse him of. But it'd keep the Jewish people happy because they came in here mad, and everybody, if you go talk to the police, I want something done about this, you hope something gets done about it. So Pilate's plan is here to kind of smooth it over with everybody, right? Be honest with me. Does it sound like a pretty good plan by Pilate? It's a compromise. Exactly. It's what it is. And anybody who's ever had a leadership position will understand the word compromise. Now, you got to make both sides happy. You got to figure out a way to make both sides. And sometimes you can't do it. But this is Pilate's plan for him. So, Pilate's good. We got this. Question 2. What's the reaction of the chief priests, the rulers, and the people to Pilate's plan? How did the mad people respond to Pilate's plan? Didn't like it. Imagine that. Hard to believe. I thought only today people got mad about stuff. Looked like people were mad about things way back when as well, right? They were unhappy with this plan. Why? Why were the chief priests and the rulers and the people mad about Pilate's plan? They would like to totally get rid of him, right? Why do they want to get rid of Jesus? He's a threat to them. I went up there to Pilate and we didn't get our way. So I fussed more about it. That never happens anymore. You guys can't relate, so we don't have to talk about that anymore, right? That's the same thing. They're mad. They're fussing. They said, ultimately, what does Pilate do? Question 3. He gives the people what they want, right? It seems to me like this is Pilate's response as a way to whatever it takes to get these people out of the door, right? Pilate's, is it worth fighting this battle over? Now, I told you this before, but as a school teacher, sometimes you hear things out the side of your ear as you walk down the hall. And the absolute right thing to do is to go grab the kid and probably punch him upside the head. But sometimes you have to think, is it worth dealing with this? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And a lot of times you just get lucky, right? And those of you that are saying you always got to deal with it, tell me how many times you've driven over 55 miles an hour. We all have, right? And the policeman's had to decide, 61. It's not worth dealing with it, all right? They got to make that decision, right? Pilate right here is saying, I could fight this battle for the next 5 years of my term. Or I could just get rid of this guy and I don't have to ever worry about it again, right? How many people do you think Pilate had signed off on their execution during his time in office? You think you got a number? Could you come up with a number? How many people had Pilate said, yeah, get rid of him? There's no telling how many, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah, they were upset. But I'm sure Pilate had signed off on the execution of many. And I would say, I could be wrong because this is all speculation, Pilate probably couldn't tell you how many he had signed off on. And most of those people, he probably never heard another thing from again. Because it's like the two people that are going to be hanging there beside Jesus that we get to here in just a few moments.
I read
Yeah.
they were nasty. If it was trouble in the camp, they would go big. And then after they left, it was trouble. They killed a lot of people caught that.
So Pilate's decision here is to give Jesus the sentence that had been requested. Now, it's probably arguable that Pilate has set a really bad precedence here. Because now, and this is not biblical, but now anytime somebody has a fault with Pilate or a fault with somebody, what do they know they can do to Pilate? They can strong arm. If we just keep on fussing, eventually he'll give in. That doesn't have anything to do with what we're going to talk about here in just a moment. But Jesus is sort of the loser in all of this, right? What had Jesus done wrong? All right, so let me rephrase. What had Jesus done illegal? Nothing. Now, wrong, those things that they had accused him of, they were wrong in the eyes of the people that were fussing at him, but there was nothing. And all the people that mattered, the people that were in charge of the law, the Pilates and the Herods, had said there was nothing that he had done wrong. No. Yeah. So let's go a little bit further. We got to clear a little more space here. This is Luke 23, 26 through 34. Dad, do you care to read this? It's actually two parts. Will, do you care to read the second part?
As they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross, not bearing his feet. And a great multitude of people followed him, and it was also more than three. Then Jesus turned to them and said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the day is coming, when the same where the Son of Man will prepare the whole and bring you to their life. And then will begin to say, not follow. For they do the same to the green one, all of you that have come. There were also two other criminals that had been put to death, and they had cut them place on the calendar. They had crucified the criminal on the right hand and the other left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And I do the right and
Let's go a little bit further. Will, this is 35 through 43. Can you see it? You can look at Grammy's Bible instead if you want to. Okay. So this we see the story of Jesus being taken to the cross. So the first question, who bears the cross of Jesus here? Simon the Cyrene, one of 7 or 8 different Simons that we see throughout the course of the Bible. Now, by all accounts, what we see here is not really an accurate depiction of what a cross would look like. That has become the standard for a cross. It became that about 700 or 800 years ago, so it's been a long time coming. But crucifixion was a common form of execution used by the Romans during this time period. So common, in fact, that the upright posts remained standing. Those were there. So if you think about a fence post, just extend it up taller, okay? So it's going to be something where your feet aren't going to hit the ground. And then they would attach you to the cross piece, and they would drop that down. So when we think about a cross, we think about a lowercase t, right? That's the common thing. The reality is, think about like an uppercase T. And this part always stays there. And then this is what we carry, okay? I don't know if this is accurate, but the way I always think about it is like a railroad tie. You know, how heavy would a railroad tie be? And you know what a railroad, all of us probably know what a railroad tie looks like, right? Some of y'all lived right down by the railroad. Y'all have seen plenty of them over time. But that would be something heavy. Why would it be difficult for Jesus to carry that?
He'd been beaten and murdered.
Yeah, he had been whipped and beaten.
Blood. He was dehydrated. He was hungry.
And it's probably a fair point to say that it'd be heavy for anybody to carry. Yeah. If you had an NFL lineman, he might could be able to handle it. But how many NFL linemen do you know? Not many, right? Most of us don't. So if we had to think about the heaviest piece of furniture in your house and then try to carry it. Or maybe here's a better one. One of them old TVs with the back and, that you got to take 8 of you to hug around it to try and get it out of there. It's heavy, right? So they compelled this man, Simon, to carry this cross. Now, who's crucified with Jesus? 2 other people, right? 2 other people. It has been debated and argued what these criminals were. Will said the word malefactors. You can get that kind of in there. Criminals. Some people describe this as bandits. It's clearly 2 people that had done something that is worthy of execution. There are 2 people. But what this tells me as much as anything is this is kind of standard operating procedure. Because you know what's going to probably happen tomorrow? It's not in the Bible, but you know what probably happened the next day? The next day. It never stopped. It was probably 3 today and 5 tomorrow, maybe 1 the next day, nobody the day after that. And, it was a steady stream of people who had done wrong. But on Jesus' cross, and I think this is told for a reason, what inscription was placed? What was written on Jesus' cross? This is the King of the Jews. Is this a sincere statement? This is a mocking statement. It's also a warning as well. Because in verse 38, it says, written over him in what languages, plural? What do we see it in? Greek. That's the word. Greek is the language of the Gentiles. What else is it written in? Latin. That's the language of the government. What else is it written in? Hebrew. That's the language of the Jewish people. Everybody that was there got their warning right there. The Gentiles who might have thought about following him, the Jews who might have thought about being the new king of the Jews, and the government who might have shown any kind of sympathy toward. Every single person got their warning right there. Does it say anything about an inscription that hung over the other 2? Don't see that. 4th question. Yeah. Yeah. Below that in verse 39, one of the criminals who was hanging there said, if you are the Christ, save yourself and us. Now, the Bible says he blasphemed him, but it's probably a fair statement. Could Jesus have saved himself in that situation? I think he could have. But the other guy on the other side didn't fuss at Jesus. He didn't jump in. He fussed at the other guy, right? And he says what in verse 40? Well, not to that just yet. In verse 40, that the other criminal says, do you not even fear God, seeing what? You're in the same spot. It's almost like he's saying that you want these to be your last words, that you've done wrong. And he says in verse 41, we did wrong. We're guilty. We're in trouble. But this guy isn't. And then he looks to Jesus in verse 42 and he says, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answers what in verse 43? Can we be saved in the same way as that person was then, today? Can we be saved in the same manner that this person on the cross? No. Because we have not ever existed in a world where Jesus was alive. Jesus dies. Next week, we're going to talk about Jesus' resurrection. And Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection is what will open the door of heaven to us. But while Jesus was on earth, Jesus could have looked at anybody and said, you can go. Jesus had a power in those verses that we just read that we don't live under today. There was no Christianity in the way that we think of it. There was no salvation in the way that we think of it today, because salvation could not happen until Jesus what? Died and was buried. He had to fulfill the plan, fulfill the old law. And so people get, that's a debated issue. We can stay here till the end of the night and talk about that. But it's a different dispensation. Sometimes I've heard people ask the question, what about people in the Old Testament? Will they be in heaven? I don't know how that works. The plan was different for those people than it is for us now. They're under the old law. This guy literally hanging on the cross beside Jesus was under the old law. The old law was about 20 minutes away from being put to death, but it wasn't dead yet. Let's do two more sets of verses, and then we'll be done. Luke chapter 23, verses 44 to 49. Mom, do you care to read that one?
And it was about 6 hours, and there was darkness over all the earth. And the sun was dark, and the veil of the temple was extended. And when Jesus had cried out in a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he led up the earth. Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was righteous. And all the people came together to that sign, and opened the thing, struck the bread, and returned. And all the acquaintance and all the group that followed, counted that far off, opened the thing.
So just a couple of things real quick. What happened from the 6th hour to the 9th hour of the day? Darkness, right? We read that there's darkness, which would have been a troubling bit of news. I mean, we've all experienced when it's tornado-ish weather, right? At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it gets dark. I always think about it like that. You know how it kind of gets that kind of oddly cool feeling, when that storm's about to come through. It's not a normal day at 3 o'clock when it gets like that. That's what we see here with this. Second question. What did Jesus say before he breathed his last? Okay. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Yes. We preached about that a couple months ago. Question number 3. What did the centurion, the guy who's responsible, if not hanging Jesus, he's at least kind of guarding the people that are hanging so nobody else would come up too. What did that guy say? Certainly this was a righteous. So what do you think caused him to have that sort of revelation? Right. And again, the job of these centurions, he probably did this every day. And it was the same every day. Just like your job was boring and tiresome. And it was this, I feel like I do this every single day. They hung them. They died, they took them down, they did whatever with them, and then tomorrow we'll come back and do it again. But things were a little different on this day. So he realizes that something's there. Verse 4, or question number 4 up here on the screen. What did the whole crowd do when they saw what had been done? They spoke the brass and they left, right? Why do you think they did that? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
This situation was terribly Jesus was innocent, and they knew it. And here's the charge. What did he do? He went around doing good and preaching. He killed him for that. That's really good. And I think the people started, they the ones that believe their belief was shattered because he died.
Yeah.
He's clear that people don't come back from the dead. He's gone. So there was a lot of reasons.
Last thing. We're going too far, so we got to last one here, then we'll be finished. Verses 50 through 56. Now behold, there was a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and just man. He had not consented to their decision indeed. He was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was also waiting for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, where no one had ever lain before. That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. And I told you that I wanted to get us through Jesus' death, but I think Jesus' death would also require us to look at burial, because there has to be a burial. We always talk about death, burial, and resurrection. You can't miss the second step to get to the third. So a couple of things there to wrap up. Who asked Pilate for the body of Jesus? Joseph of Arimathea. It says he was a man of the council. This is kind of a high-ranking official, but it said, what about him with regards to the accusations against Jesus? So he was against this. While his other council members had been some that had promoted this, he was against it. The Bible says that he was a good man, right? Number two, what was done with the body of Jesus? Three things. First, took it down from the cross. Second, wrapped in linen. And what's the third thing? Laid it in a new tomb. Unfortunately, in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I've been in a place where 2 people have died. I have never experienced that before until these last couple of weeks. I've never been in a hospital room with somebody who was dead. And unfortunately, I've been in Ron's hospital room and I've been in Cricket's hospital room. But what happens today is pretty similar to what they did back then. Because on both of those occasions, a representative from the funeral home has came, and they've had a stretcher, and they've had things to wrap with, and they take that person to the funeral home, and they get it ready. And then a couple or 3 days later, after the funeral, I've been to 2 cemeteries, and I've seen a body. We don't have tombs really anymore, but seen a body placed in the ground. That's a new experience for me, but y'all have probably experienced that before. Jesus was treated in a similar way right there. And I think as bad as Jesus' death was, his treatment post-death could not have hardly been any better, right? Because the people there that cared about him, they wanted to take care of him, and they realized that his treatment had been horrible. He should have never been put to death in the first place. He was accused of things he hadn't done. But from this point, from the moment Jesus was dead, you can see people like Joseph of Arimathea, the women that had come from Galilee. They were prepared to make this next part as good as it possibly could be. Number 3, who returned to Jesus' tomb with spices and fragrant oils? The women. The women. The people that he had taught. The people that had followed him. And so what we've seen here tonight is Jesus' death. Unnecessary in the sense that Jesus had not done anything. This would be called a wrongful death today. But in ways necessary as well, because it had been foretold that that's what had to happen. And so when we look at this death of Jesus, we can look at it in sort of a juxtaposed way, right? We can look at it and say, it's a shame that it had to happen, with the knowledge that it did have to happen. We can look at it and say, it's a shame that they treated somebody this way, but knowing that that treatment opens the door for something for us that was not there beforehand. And so we look at this sort of in 2 different ways when we consider what happened to Jesus. Next week, when we look at John, we'll look at the resurrection, but we'll stop right there with that. Does anybody have any questions about what we've talked about? We went long, and I apologize. I hope it's not snowing, sleeting, and all that kind of stuff. If anybody, if it's a trip home, a wild trip home, you can blame me, and I apologize. But if there's anything that we can do for you tonight, any way that we can help you, we certainly would invite you to come while we stand and sing.
Been to Jesus.